My 1-year anniversary with the company, I wrestled none other than the Golden Goose, the star, the moneymaker, the big...
Hulk Hogan ruled wrestling's golden age, but behind the glory was a hidden system of power only The Undertaker dared to expose. After decades of silence, he is finally telling the truth about the tunnel Hogan built to control everything, and it all begins the night of their first match the secret Hogan never wanted out. When The Undertaker first stepped into the ring with Hulk Hogan, he was not just facing an icon, he was stepping into the shadow of an empire. Hogan was not merely a wrestler, he was a walking institution. The blonde handlebar mustache, the bandana, the theme song blaring Real American, all of it was a symbol of the 1980s dream. But behind the bright lights and the red and yellow spectacle, there was a darker structure, a secret path that only a few knew existed. This path was not carved in stone beneath Titan Towers or hidden in some corner of Madison Square Garden. It was a system, a tunnel not of concrete but of influence. Hogan's secret network of leverage, backdoor deals, and unspoken rules, and according to The Undertaker, that system changed the course of his life and the lives of countless others who came through WWE's locker rooms.
Can I talk to you? I'm really nervous. Tombstone. I got this bad neck. Look, I promise you, I'll take great care.
That was November 1991, The Undertaker's first anniversary in the company. He was still new, quiet, and respectful, the kind of man who let his work speak for itself. Across from him stood Hulk Hogan, the undisputed face of Vince McMahon's empire, the Golden Goose, the man whose image had sold millions in pay-per-views, toys, and tickets. That night, they were scheduled for a finish that would make The Undertaker world champion, a historic moment, but it was not the gold that would define that night. It was the moment Hogan uttered those nervous words backstage, planting the seed of something that would haunt The Undertaker for decades.
We get into the match, and now it's time to finish. Finish is where I'm going to tombstone him on the chair. I've given my kids rougher bumps than I give Hogan. I wrap him up. I've got him. The chair comes down. Boom. As soon as my knees touch. Oh, brother, you got me. I'm that is crippled the Golden Goose.
He thought he had broken Hogan's neck. The Undertaker, ever the professional, replayed the footage and analyzed every movement and every impact. Then came the shock. Hogan's head had never touched the mat, not even close. Yet Hogan went straight to Vince McMahon's office, laid himself dramatically on the floor, and claimed injury. It was not just a misunderstanding, it was a message. The Undertaker had unknowingly stepped into Hulk Hogan's tunnel, the one lined with politics, manipulation, and perfectly placed shadows. Hogan did not just dominate the ring, he dominated perception. He knew how to bend reality, to shape narratives, and to turn allies into liabilities. His influence was so deep that even the most respected veterans walked cautiously around him. For The Undertaker, that night was his initiation. For years, fans wondered why the two legends never clicked, why tension simmered beneath their brief championship exchanges. The Undertaker would later confirm it himself. What happened after that match was not about pain or injury, it was about trust, and Hogan had violated it. That moment fractured something sacred in the locker room, because in wrestling loyalty was everything, and Hogan's act showed that even loyalty had a price.
In life, things come back. All the podcasts and all the books and everything, and everybody realizes that Hogan wasn't the guy who was betrayed.
Years later, when The Undertaker finally spoke openly about that era, his words carried the weight of every silence that had come before. He was not just recalling a rivalry, he was lifting the lid off a culture that had been buried beneath decades of kayfabe and corporate myth-making. He described the architecture of Hogan's secret tunnel, a network where power flowed in one direction and truth rarely saw daylight. And he was not alone in feeling its effects. Behind the curtain, other wrestlers began to piece together the same realization. Bret Hart once described Hogan bluntly, calling him a phony piece of trash, a man who pretended to be a hero on camera while quietly burying his peers backstage. The tunnel was not just Hogan's advantage, it was his survival mechanism. It shielded him from accountability and kept him untouchable. Even when controversy followed him outside the ring, and controversy always followed, by the mid-2000s Hogan's name had become entangled in scandal after scandal, from the Gawker lawsuit to leaked recordings that damaged his legacy and fractured his public image. Yet somehow he kept re-emerging. Each time the world wrote him off, he found another way through that tunnel, another connection, another media redemption, another handshake that reset the narrative. It was during this period that fans began to see cracks in the myth of Hulkamania. The Undertaker, meanwhile, remained the constant, the moral center of the wrestling universe. His silence spoke volumes, because when The Undertaker stays silent, it is not indifference, it is restraint. So when he finally opened up decades later, it was not gossip, it was history. Even in honesty, The Undertaker did not deny Hogan's importance. He recognized him as one of wrestling's pillars, a Mount Rushmore figure. But that acknowledgement came with a caveat, because without Hogan there is no WWE as we know it, and without Hogan's tunnel, the manipulation, the control, the illusion, there is no understanding of how fragile that empire really was. The Undertaker's reflections carried the tone of a man who had seen both sides, the glory and the corruption, the triumphs and the betrayals that shaped modern wrestling. It was not until years later that others began to speak about the same thing in their own way. Vince McMahon in an old interview once said, "When you are at the top of any field, there are people who want to dig into your past and find out what you are about." He framed it as admiration, but The Undertaker knew better. The digging had always been part of the tunnel system. Information was not used to destroy careers, it was used to control them. And Hogan, he had mastered that art long before anyone else. Even those closest to him, like his daughter Brooke, seemed to understand the duality.
Everybody's like, oh, Brooke stands by her dad and stuff. Like, first of all, that's who I am. I'm loyal. Like, if you're honest with me, it doesn't matter. I will love you. I'll stand up for you till the end. People can have different opinions, right? Like, I'm not God. I can't judge. I can't tell you if you're right or wrong.
That was the word that kept Hogan's tunnel intact. Family, fans, and fellow wrestlers all became part of a structure that defended him even when the evidence was clear. Brooke's interviews over the years showed a daughter trying to humanize a man the world had turned into a caricature. Her empathy was not denial, it was a mirror reflecting the humanity that the wrestling world often stripped away. And in that mirror, The Undertaker saw both the man and the machine, the man who had once accused him of nearly crippling him, and the machine that had turned that accusation into a weapon. What most fans did not know was that The Undertaker carried that experience quietly for years. It was not until the late 2010s, when podcasts and documentaries began re-examining wrestling history, that he started to speak freely. His tone was measured, but beneath it was the sting of betrayal, not because Hogan lied, but because he had manipulated an entire generation into believing in his own mythology. By then, The Undertaker's words were not just commentary, they were a post-mortem. The death of kayfabe had exposed the bodies buried in Hogan's tunnel. Yet even then the story was not over, because buried under all the interviews, the scandals, and the comebacks, there was still one question no one could answer. How did Hogan always find a way back? Every time his reputation collapsed, every time the fans turned on him, he would re-emerge cleaner, sharper, more marketable. That was not luck, that was infrastructure. The tunnel was still open, and Hogan was still walking through it. For The Undertaker, who built his career on mystique and authenticity, that truth was both fascinating and disturbing, because while The Undertaker created darkness in the ring, Hogan had perfected it backstage, the tunnel under Titan Towers. That is Kurt Angle recalling the day he was told he would be facing Hulk Hogan and that he would be making him submit. But the way Vince McMahon handled it told a different story. Before Hogan even entered the room, Vince had already staged the encounter like a psychological test. Two chairs, one facing the other, and an instruction whispered to Angle: when Hogan walks in, get right up in his face. The reaction said everything. Hogan's ego was not built to lose, not even in scripted entertainment. Every decision, every angle, every handshake had to feed the myth of Hulkamania. It was not about winning the match, it was about maintaining control of the narrative, control of the tunnel. That story, part of WWE's chaotic backstage folklore, reveals how deep Hogan's influence ran. He was not just a performer, he was an institution operating parallel to Vince McMahon's own authority. Vince might have owned the company, but Hogan owned the perception. Even Vince himself admitted in later interviews that the business was not as scripted as outsiders believed.
So pretty much doing whatever I wanted to do. You know, I kind of like got involved with Vince, and everybody says, oh, this business is the work. Okay. Well, if I'm making twice as much money as you, and you're wrestling me, is that a work? Shoot.
In wrestling slang, a shoot means reality. When Hogan said the business was a shoot, he was not talking about competition in the ring. He was talking about the politics, the real fights that happened in boardrooms, locker rooms, and contract negotiations. That was the tunnel's true geography, not beneath Titan Towers in Connecticut, but beneath the surface of the business itself. A web of favors, silent alliances, and whispered threats kept Hogan untouchable. Even McMahon, who built WWE into a global juggernaut, could not fully dismantle that structure. In fact, for years, he benefited from it. Hogan's tunnel was McMahon's pipeline to power. Together, they used it to manage the image of professional wrestling, rewriting reality in real time. The tunnel was invisible but omnipresent. It is why Hogan could walk into Vince's office, play the injured hero, and walk out with sympathy, better booking, and even creative control clauses that no other wrestler dared to demand. It is why Bret Hart's criticism years later, calling Hogan phony, was not just a personal grudge, it was a protest against a system that allowed one man's narrative to override everyone else's truth. By the late 1990s, the tunnel had expanded far beyond WWE. When Hogan moved to WCW, he took the playbook with him there. Under Ted Turner's massive budget, he refined the formula: influence disguised as charisma, manipulation disguised as business savvy. Every company Hogan joined eventually reshaped itself around him. And when the collapse came, he was always the last man standing. Back in WWE, The Undertaker and the locker room veterans had learned the lesson the hard way. If Hogan was in the building, power moved differently, storylines shifted, decisions were reversed. Even Vince's notorious temper seemed to quiet when Hogan's name came up. There was a reason for that silence. Hogan represented more than a star. He represented the mythology that kept the wrestling business profitable, the illusion of immortality, and immortality requires secrecy. Behind the curtain, wrestlers whispered about how certain creative meetings would happen late at night behind closed doors, away from the rest of the roster. Some joked about Hogan's tunnel as a literal thing, a secret passage beneath Titan Towers where Hogan met with Vince to negotiate outcomes, rewrite finishes, or plan controversial returns. It was never real, of course, but it symbolized something that felt very real. It symbolized the unseen route Hogan used to maintain his dominance. Even when scandals threatened to erase him, the tunnel would reopen. After the Gawker lawsuit in 2016, when Hogan sued the media outlet that published his private footage, many assumed his public life was over. But Hogan won the case, and the fallout reshaped American media law. He walked away with a massive payout and, astonishingly, another redemption arc.